Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better, to provide solutions in a calm, connected way. I'm Jenny Langley.
And I'm Mark Langley.
Mark Langley is here with me today, ready to answer some great horse-related questions. Today, it's a real mixed bag. There'll be something that will prick your ears up, I'm sure. They include stopping food aggression, floating problems, and foals. Let's get straight into it, Mark, with a question from Beck on a young horse who is only rising 3, unstarted, and has had a small amount of education under his belt. What he's doing is he's rolling as soon as he's had a bit of a bath or a shower, and he will just do anything to have that roll. So it doesn't matter if they're walking back to the yard or she's trying to do something with him, he wants to have that roll. She has tried to stop him having a roll once, and he reared and had a small tantrum. So after that, they did some leading backwards and forwards, and she gave him some space to roll. She can see this behaviour might become a problem moving forward with any education that they do, and she's just not sure how to deter him. She wants to know what would be the best course of action to help him realise that there is a time and a place to roll, and what should she do if she has a fair dinkum tantrum. As you can gather, Beck is from Australia.
When I was reading that question, it's quite interesting because, there's horses can be quite impulsive, and if you look at horses, when they're in a herd situation, they sort of act on impulse a lot of the times, unless there's reason to act on caution, like going up to a new horse that they don't know, or, when you see foals going up to say hello to horses, there's a certain cautious aspect where they sort of mouth when they go up to other horses, and there's a certain, wariness in them. But in a lot of cases, a lot of horses just act on impulse, whereas humans, we sort of, might ask to leave the table or something like that. We might wait till someone finishes a conversation before we might sort of get acknowledged, then to sort of, come into the conversation ourselves. And that's just generally sort of, body language that we read and stuff like that. So with horses, when we train and work with horses, we're ultimately creating a mindset where they have, like, and people have heard me say this before, the right amount of curiosity and the right amount of caution. So in the right mindset with the right amount of curiosity and caution, and having like thoughts that are adjustable, then we have a situation where the horse is not always acting on impulse, because they're in that working mindset. So if you're hosing a horse, then they're in a mindset that's more of a mindset where they're listening to the lead rope and the halter, and they don't just act on impulse. So if you were hosing your horse and just let it off in the paddock, wouldn't matter what it did, because that's their time just to go and do what they want, and they can roll. So really, it's just a sensory processing thing. They get the water on, they want to go and roll. If you want your horse not to roll, then you have to keep them in the halter or do something with them so they don't roll. And I guess what you're saying in the question is the impulse is so strong that they override any intervening that you're trying to do. So it means there's a hole in the education. If the horse rears when you're trying to say maybe let go of that thought about rolling, then obviously when your horse is interrupted when it's acting on impulse, it gets quite worried or upset about that, and I think we need to sort of sort that out. So what I'd be working on is better leading, where the horse really knows when it's got a halter on, it's centered in that lead rope, and you can adjust its thoughts forwards, backwards. You can guide it left, right, and when you place that rope soft, the horse is nice and soft there. Little things that I do when I'm teaching horses to lead or ground tie on the lead is if the horse kind of just looks off, I might interrupt that thought and say, well, the lead rope didn't sort of move, so can you keep your thoughts nice and centered? And it's important that they learn that, because they can look around a little bit, but there's obviously a boundary to making a decision and doing something. So So a horse can look at something, but then if it looks and goes, oh, I need to go and do that, you say, well, no, can you let go of that thought because that's not available. So I think more in your leading and all the work you have to do is you've got to see, is my horse changing its thought? Can I interrupt it? And is that interruption ready, available? And the horse is okay when they have that thought interrupted, and keep working on that. And that's, as I say, with the leading left, leading right, standing quietly, all that sort of stuff. And if you have that right, then basically as soon as you see that horse have a thought to roll, you can pick up the rope or and say, let go of that thought. If you have to kind of pop a flag or do something big to interrupt them, then that tells me that there's still holes in the groundwork and the leading work. That means that there's times that you can't interrupt that horse with just a soft feel. So you have to really look back at all the things you're doing, and is your horse adjustable and changing its thought with all the transitions you're doing in leading? And if that's working, then then this impulse shouldn't happen. And like my saying to a lot of people is like I get someone like there's a young girl on a pony club horse, and that horse was hard to get to go, and everyone's saying, hit it with a stick or kick it with spurs. And I said, well, if that horse can't let go of a standstill and if that horse can't move at a standstill, then imagine trying to stop it from a gallop. So basically that horse couldn't let go of a thought at a standstill. It was just thinking about maybe staying with its mates or something like that. Imagine when you got that horse galloping, you wouldn't be able to stop it. And obviously you've already recognised that, because if your horse does have a big fair dinkum tantrum, you can't intervene and say, hey, let go of that, because if the horse just wants to do a roll, then they're already doing it and you can't help them. So just think about all those things and really look at, how adjustable is my horse's mind, and how centered is it in a working mindset, and make sure it's in a good mindset before you roll it, and keep it in that mindset for half an hour after till it dries off if you don't want it to roll and get all the dirt back on it.
Are there times, though, that you can't adjust their mindset, or it's just not fair on the horse to be doing training because of a certain thing that's happening? So I'll give you an example. I've got a question here from Laurie from the States. Her mare, she has one of her mares that has a really strong sort of response when she's in heat, and she gets really easily distracted. But one of the things that's happening is that when she asks her to back up when she's in heat, she'll squat as if she's going to do a wee. So it's nothing major, but you can see that there's quite a huge behavioural link with being in heat. So is this a sort of scenario where you shouldn't be training at that time? Should you pause the training? Is it appropriate to be training when she is in heat, or is this an appropriate time to actually be saying, no, this is when you need to be adjustable?
Well, all horses, when they're in season, can show different levels of intensity, I suppose, of their emotions when they're in season. And depending on how soft we have a horse, like an example might be, I see people working at Liberty, and because of the emotion at Liberty, the horse is up and quite highly kind of, I would say, anxious, and the people like that because they say they're playful, but I'd say, oh no, I think they've got a hard thought. I think they're kind of getting almost in a space which I would think is not softness. But so in a lot of training we do with horses, we can have them in a soft mindset, or we can have them sort of a bit stressed in training. And so when you have a horse that is in season, there's obviously the hormones are different. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things that are mimicking certain behaviours, like backing up could cause a feeling in her that causes a rise of what she does, So what I would say is, I would look at how soft she is when she's not in season, how well she backs up, if she's thinking backwards, if it's just a pathway, not some stressful thing that's creating sort of a bit of anxiety in her. Because I've found sometimes we can tap into a horse's, I guess, hormonal emotions when there's certain things running through their system when they're not in season. So like the other question, how soft is your horse? How available, how adjustable is it? And is backing up just a pathway, or is it still a bit of a brace and a bit of a a threat? Is she bracing up in the hind feet and things like that? Because I think once a horse can do something very, very well, the spiking in emotion when they're in season is not as great. So the horse is not sort of having some flashback of like, oh, this is getting mounted by a stallion, or what's ever happening that's causing that her to be like that. So there are times that some horses you just need to give a break at certain times because of this. But usually what I notice is the horses that still have certain worries and unsureties and stuff like that in them, they're usually the ones that have a lot more sensory processing when they're in season, when other things are going on, when all the horses are galloping around. Like when you get off them, there's a lot of horses, geldings and mares, that when you get off them, they have a bit of a squeal, and some get to a stage that almost like you're saying, it's almost like some hormonal behaviour that there's a feeling there's a stallion around and they're getting mounted by a stallion. Like some horses have a little nicker when you get off them, and it's just a trigger as you get off that creates an emotion. And I've seen it get big enough to be quite emotional. But the horses that I've seen that do it in a big way, they got some anxiety issues in there, some troubles in there, and there's something going on in there that needs to be sorted out. And they're the ones that sort of usually have a bigger hormonal kind of response when you get on and off them, or more so off them. So, yeah, I can't say, it's a hard answer because I don't know how soft she is when she's not in season and how well she changes her thought and how adjustable she is. And
so what sort of things would you be looking for to check that she is soft enough? Is there something that you can just highlight quickly?
Well, when you back her up, if backing up is the biggest issue, then, back her up. And if she's floating backwards, her ears are back and she's just softly backing up, when you squeeze her forward from her back up, is she kind of a bit, is she a bit kind of worried, or is she a bit emotional about that, a bit sensitive, and is her thoughts going forwards and her thoughts going backwards? Because sometimes, that pressure of backing up. And how do you back her up? Do you back her up with legs and reins, or do you just back her up with the reins? Sometimes legs and reins together, and that feeling of grabbing in the back up could cause a hormonal behaviour, whereas maybe just backing through the reins might be less like, that feeling of grabbing around the rib cage or anything like that. The other thing you can that I guess you've got to take in mind is if she's thinking backwards when she's backing up, more thoughts are back on all that stimulant behind her, and that could be just another trigger to cause that hormonal behaviour. But I think you've got to do some tests. Like really anything needs an experiment. Just look at how well she's doing things, and then if you see some holes when she's not in season, train her a bit more, and then when she's in season, work her again, and just see what happens. And maybe do it like something I would look at as when her thoughts, if you're walking her forward and her thoughts go forward and they're nice and, like they're thinking ahead, and when you pick up the reins and her thoughts come back, and then she has that hormonal behaviour, bringing her thoughts back through her body and backing up could be part of the trigger. But yeah, I guess you can just do your own trial and error on that. So.
Now, this is one where you can't do a trial and error very particularly. It's a question about a foal and whether the foal being kept with its mum is giving it confidence or inhibiting it. So a question comes from Emmeline in Australia, and she has a gelding who's now rising 3. So not so much a foal anymore. He has a very dominant mare as a mother. They are together in the same herd. Now, the bear is the boss of this herd. It's a herd of about 8. And she's noticed that over the past few months, this particular gelding is always hiding behind his mum and barely leaves her side. So that gelding is the only one that she will allow to be in her space. Emmeline's wondering if this behaviour might be contributing towards perhaps how he's internalising stress, perhaps how he lacks confidence in and out of the herd, because obviously he's not interacting with the others if he's always with her, and possibly a bit of shutdown behaviour. Should she be looking at running him in a separate herd to help his confidence grow again?
Yeah, I certainly think doing something about the situation is going to help him. He may be pushed out of the herd for a little bit if you do that, and you may have to accept that he's got to work his way in somehow. But the thing about it is if she was in the wild, though there's sort of horses may hang in certain family groups, the foal that's going to be sort of the new foal is going to be the one that is going to be the one closest to the mother that she looks after. So he would naturally still might be in that family group and close by, but he's not going to be sort of protected as much by his mother as he is now. So maybe she's just, you know, hung on to the idea that, you know, well, she seems to be the, like you said, the dominant one in the herd, so she can control situations how she wants it. Maybe she is overprotective on him, and I think you're probably right to sort of question it, because you know, we can't really say every herd's the same, because every herd's so different, every horse is so different, and there's always some things that happen in a herd that I think for another horse can cause a negative impact in their emotional growth, and I believe this would be causing a negative impact in his emotional growth if she's protecting him. If any other horses come into conflict with him, she's the one that sorts out the problem. He's not actively searching. He's just, and almost she might control him too. She might have that bit of a, you know, you stay there and I'll sort it out. So that could cause him to internalize, not reach out, things like that, and cause him to shut down. Like horses at the bottom of the pecking order, like, you know, you see a horse that doesn't have its own little friend group and they're a small herd, they tend to shut down and have a lot of, you know, anxiety inside them, and when you work with them you can really feel it. But if it's a big enough herd, then you don't have that so much, because there's always little micro herds in between that, and like little friend groups that go off on their own. But there's you probably, I would definitely try and do something about that, change the dynamics, and she probably needs to be away from him, or he needs to be away from her, so she doesn't have that sort of radar around him that keeps him so insular. So yeah, definitely. The thing is, you know, if you've got enough horses, you could maybe put her with another horse or a couple of horses and let him, you know, just start to mix with a herd. You could take her right out, but then that'd stress her out a lot. You might have to figure out a way that you can sort of, you know, separate her from a herd, and even just have him with maybe 3 other horses to see how he goes for a while, and then sort of maybe give him some time, and, you know, see how 6 months goes, and then trial her coming back into a herd and see where he's at. I would only do trial and error in that situation as well, because once you've separated them, you can really, you know, see after time if he grows up a bit and he starts to sort of express himself a little bit. The last thing you'd want, though, is him with another dominant horse that is going to sort of capitalise on his kind of insecurity and weakness, because and also you got to realise that if you do this, because if his mother's had that sort of radar around him, say for instance if he was to be put with another herd, he's not going to be allowed in for a while, because he doesn't have enough I guess stability to be welcomed in it. So it might take him a while, and you're going to have to sort of watch him be on the outskirts for a while, and just monitor him, see how he goes. But those outskirts could be, you know, 2-3 weeks. It could be a while. So you don't sort of go, 2 or 3 days. You go, it's not going to work. He might be on the outskirts for a while. As long as there's no danger and he's not, you know, really going to this full stressful fretting, then he'll slowly work his way in over time.
Moving on to the next question, which is about floating, and a floating that has progressively got worse. It comes from Susan, who has an Australian stock horse gelding, who she bought about 2.5 years ago. He's now 8. Now, when she got him, he would float, presumably like without any issues. And the only thing that she noticed was that he would try and turn and get off the float and come out forwards. So she tried to teach him to reverse off, which was a lot safer. She's had a couple of instances that maybe have affected him. So he bumped his head on a rug rack, which made him a little bit more head shy. And then a few months later, he was reluctant to go and get loaded after an outing. He eventually got on after about 30 minutes and then refused to load. 18 months down the track, he will load, but he starts to move out once the divider is moved. Now, she's on her own, and she'd really like some help with this, because she feels at the moment this is just a really big problem. they haven't really got to the progress that she feels that they want to, and she feels quite grounded.
Yeah, by the sounds of it, just a few little sort of, red flags that I see is hitting his head on the rug rack, and I think he's a horse that if you stress him, he's going to come out of the float. And I think you're only sort of working with a thread when you load him, in a sense of, he goes in, but if you shook the float, if you banged it, if you frightened him, he's going to pull out, and there's not much you can do about it. So he's at a stage, that he needs to realise that boundaries are boundaries. And when I talk about boundaries, the first boundary is if he was to pull back and you're not really, then I think he's still going to keep pulling back. So I tend to, horses that got to that stage that I would create a bit of a leading lesson outside where I actually create a bit of a pullback and I wait with them until they come forward. And I would do that quite a lot. Like what I do is I might have him on a long rope, bang the float, maybe wave the flag in the air. He steps back, and if he walks backwards, I just walk with him until they step forward. And I keep repeating that until he stops stepping back into pressure and realising that, he has to step forward and leaning and backing through that pressure is not available. And you create the pullback before you go in. And I know that sounds a bit like, you're creating a bit of a conflict with him, but you can't put him in the float and then suddenly shake the float or open the divider and then he goes, I've got to get out of here, because that's what's happening. So he's already created his own conflict. So what's going to happen by creating a bit of a pullback when he's outside, you're actually saying, well, you've pulled back and that's not available, and do that enough times till he goes, pulling back's not available, what else can I do? And then you get a bit more, discipline in that lead rope, and maybe take him out and say, let's lead up fast. Walk, trot up, like really fast. Not with him following your body language, but him following the lead rope. So, can pull on that lead rope and he can just trot up really softly. And most horses that have what you're having near the float, I find don't lead really well. And then we don't have a tool we can adjust them or help them when they're worried inside the float. So you have to go really back and really look at that leading. And then if it's a claustrophobia thing, you wouldn't look at claustrophobia until the horse is 100% good at leading softly and trusting that rope, because you can't have, I don't trust pressure on my head and I'm frightened of the float, all working at once together to get him quiet in the float. You've got to get one right, and the tool that you guide him with has to be the one that he's okay with. Another thing that I do with horses that are a bit claustrophobic by the sounds of the dividers that are closing and stuff like that, I put them in long reins and I move them around in the long reins. I don't necessarily go forward in long reins like a cart horse pulling a cart. I just back them up, move them around so the reins go around their back end and they move softly with their hind feet and front feet in the reins in both directions, and they're completely loose and comfortable. And that just gets them so much looser and available to move those hindquarters at any moment and move softly and stuff like that. I put a breeching rope on them. I lead them up with a breeching rope just to know that they've had that pressure around their back end and they're completely comfortable coming forward to that. If you do all that really well, the float's just one little part of the whole thing. But most horses I come across that doing the things that you're saying, every little part of that is causing a bit of a brace. The float, the head pressure, all those sorts of things. So, you've really got to look at how well he does that other stuff before you can even think about putting him on the float.
Okay, and the last question for today is from Dinika, and it's about food aggression. She's only just recently joined the membership, so welcome, Dinika. It's great to have you on board. She's got some troubles with her mare, and one of them is food aggression. She can become very threatening if you go near her while she's eating. 2 years and multiple techniques haven't made any difference, and some of the more traditional methods she feels have made her worse. So she'd really like your take on this. She's just not sure how she can help her mare not be so food aggressive. And I guess this is aggressive towards her as a person while she's eating, not other horses.
Something I say to people is food aggression, you don't have food aggression like in horses that grow up on grass and they've got a happy life. So who knows the horse's past, but like a lot of horses with food aggression, I'll give you an example, like say for instance it's a stabled horse. Gets stable, put out once a week, maybe worked in an arena. It's quite stressed in the arena because it gets jammed up in the arena and hit with a stick, and it's never quite soft in the arena. Goes back into its stable where it's a bit stressed. The highlight of its day is food. So, and it becomes like an addiction because if you're in a stressed environment, then eating becomes your like it's not the endorphin, but you know that fix that you get. So it's something that you go, oh, that's my that you know. So when so that's why you get a lot of food aggression, because it becomes like a bit of an addiction for a horse that has a lot of other things that are stressful in its life, where normal horses in a herd won't have that addiction because their life has a balance of, you know, mutual grooming with other horses, just standing under a tree, you know, just moving about softly with the other horses and just being in a good mindset. So there's no kind of, oh, this is the best part of my day, because there's a lot more things that are good in their day that are happening, so they don't get that food aggression. So most horses with food aggression will be hand fed. They don't get an access to enough grazing and stuff like that. And also there's other aspects in their life that are quite stressful. So, you know, I could go through the whole lot, but I want you to look at all those things, and you might have adjusted that, you know, in your life with your horse, but it could be from a past life of your horse that the food aggressions really come from. But something I would say is, if you've got your horse in a grassy environment, and a lot of people don't have grass, so put your hay out there, your slow feeder hay that they can just have all the time, so they're not kind of so they've got food in their tummy all the time. Now, there's still horses that have hay and they've still got food aggression at clinics, as I say, because it's ingrained in them around food, okay? The biggest thing is you don't want to be very dominant, and you don't want to be like some alpha horse that's going to push them off their hay. The other thing is horses that are sort of got really strong food aggression, I try and not interfere with them when they're eating. That's the most important thing for a little while. Not all the time, until you can get them out of food aggression, okay? At a clinic a while ago, I had a horse that had food aggression, and, you know, as I said just earlier on, you don't want to be like approaching them aggressively like an alpha horse, because that causes the conflict and the rift between them. But something that I do to start the process, I guess, of getting a horse to soften near food, is in this particular horse, I had a food bucket, and that made her very aggressive, me having the food bucket. But I had her on a long rope, and I would just keep stopping her. I'd have the flag in my hand, and I was doing, I own the food. It's my food. It's not your food. And I taught her to walk softly, one step at a time, up to the food, and then gently eat it quietly while I was standing there. And that was kind of a way of teaching her to come to the food softly. And when she was soft, she could eat food. So she came to the food, and I had the food near me, so she could eat near me softly. And that was probably the start of her starting to sort of eat softly near someone. But I wouldn't try and come into her space once she's got the food. And it could be a lesson that you do for some time, because if it's an old habit ingrained, like an old addiction, I suppose, then you might have to do it every day, like a transition. Come softly to the food, join me, we'll break bread together. And, you know, like when you see two young horses, like I was just at the Western States Horse Expo, and they had a group of these young yearling Mustangs there, and they're all just kind of eating hay out of the same spot, you know, because they get fed, I guess, you know, because these weren't straight off the wild. They go to these like BLM paddocks, the Bureau of Land Management sort of yards, and they kind of all just eat hay, but it's all gets thrown in together, so they just all kind of just chew through the hay like they're out in the wild. So, and they're just eating hay beside each other. There's no food aggression and stuff like that. So basically, you kind of, you know, you teach her one step at a time to come to you, and she eats the hay beside you, so she learns to eat beside you and feel not threatened. Don't go into her space for it until she's a lot softer, and that'll really help her out. But as I say, if you can do those other things, you know, food that she can eat kind of all the time, and look at all the other things in her life where there might be a dark mindset. You know, is her training good? Does she feel good? Is she going towards her thoughts? when you train her? Is she, all those other things contribute to food being the highlight of a day. And if we're making her feel troubled, like if the person's making the horse feel troubled when we work them, they don't want us near their food because that's their highlight. That's their kind of like good place. So I say to everyone, that's why I don't do food aggression methods, because if that food aggression is stemmed from a bad feeling from education from the person, then you fix that bad feeling from education, and then all of a sudden you get less food aggression. So,
and it is fixable.
And it is fixable.
Oh, it's good to know.
Yeah. It is fixable. Like it's like old habits. It is hard to fix, but if you can. I believe anything you can create a soft mindset if you work hard at it, but it's not just a sort of rouse on them, kind of shoo them off. It's more so let's educate this horse to be soft. So as I said, the one that had food aggression, she had to be soft, and every time she took a step, she had to soften and just until she could just put her head in the bucket. And I softly and eat nice and softly, and so she'd already let go of the hard emotion by the time she got to the food. And it's a tough lesson, but if you do it, you should get some good results.
Let's leave it at that. That's a really nice ending to hear, and educating horses to become more softer is what we're all about. Thanks for your tips, Mark. I hope that helps all of you listening, and thanks for the questions that have come through from our online members.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you, everybody.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like it, share it, or send us a comment. It all helps in reaching new ears and helping more horses. And if making a change in your horse appeals to you, Mark offers his direct support and a diverse learning platform. Head to marklangley.com.au and grab your 7-day free trial.